I walked into the conference room carrying the device, the handover checklist, the access logs, and the verification forms, everything required to transfer responsibility exactly as scheduled. The meeting had been set days earlier by Megan Crowell herself. Time, location, scope, all confirmed. I arrived early, I always do. I laid everything out neatly on the table, powered nothing on, broke no seals, policy first. Then I waited. Megan didn't show. No message, no call, no delay notice, just silence stretching minute by minute. The kind that crawls under your skin when you know you're doing everything right and it still doesn't matter. The silence seemed to seep into my bones, along with the cold outside. I kept rubbing my hands together because this couldn't be taken lightly. What's the temperature where you are right now, if you're still here with me? Please share your lucky number with me. I called her extension. Voicemail. I waited past the required window. Because professionalism has a way of becoming your own trap. When the clock ran out, I did what I've done for years. I documented the no-show, logged the attempted handover, secured the device back into inventory. Every step time-stamped, every action traceable, clean, boring, correct. Then I left. That afternoon, while I was closing routine tickets, Megan was sitting comfortably in the office of CEO Richard Halverson, telling a version of events where I was the problem. She said I was uncooperative. She said I had an attitude. She said I never came to the meeting, in her story. She was the diligent manager blocked by a difficult employee. In reality, she hadn't bothered to show up at all. That's the difference between us. I work in procedures, logs, and accountability, the unglamorous backbone that keeps systems standing. Megan works in perception, in tone, in stories that sound convincing when told to the right person. By the end of the day, my reliability was under review. Years of quiet, measurable work blurred by one confident lie. What just happened was only the beginning. The next part of the story contains some fictional elements and uses AI to clarify the message and enhance the emotional experience. If you empathize, I greatly appreciate it. If not, I hope you have a peaceful evening and a good night's sleep. The next morning, I was called to the top floor without an agenda, without witnesses, without the courtesy of context. Richard Halverson didn't ask me to sit. He folded his hands and said, "We're ending your contract effective immediately." Then he added, almost casually, "We've lost confidence in your attitude." I waited for questions that never came. No investigation, no verification, no request for logs, timelines, or records. When I opened my mouth, he cut me off. "This isn't a debate," he said. "Your behavior yesterday raised concerns." In that frozen moment, memory rushed in, not nostalgia. Just facts. I am Jolie Hart, Senior Infrastructure and Compliance Architect. I designed the compliance framework that carried this company through federal audits without penalties. I signed off on final approvals for system changes that kept operations running when failures threatened millions. When managers like Megan made mistakes, I stayed late and fixed them quietly so leadership never had to explain the damage. None of that earned me a sentence. Richard leaned back. "Megan tells me you were difficult." He continued, "Uncooperative, unprofessional, across the glass." Megan Crowell stood with her arms crossed. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her silence was the victory lap. She had always resented that my work spoke louder than her authority, and now words had beaten evidence. I nodded because arguing would have made it worse. Humiliation works best when you're expected to beg. As I stood to leave, one detail landed with surgical clarity. The termination date was deliberate. It fell exactly one business day before the mandatory system compliance cycle, the one I had designed, documented, and certified alone. They didn't just fire me. They fired me at the worst possible moment, and everyone knew it in the building that morning. I left the building the same way I had entered it for years, quietly, professionally, without giving anyone the satisfaction of resistance. No arguing, no pleading, no last-minute speeches about loyalty. I handed over my badge, signed the exit acknowledgement, and followed every step of the off-boarding checklist they slid across the table. That calm unsettled them. People expect emotion when they pull the rug out from under you. They expect anger, tears, negotiation. I gave them none. I thanked security for walking me out and wished the receptionist a good afternoon. If humiliation was the goal, I wasn't going to perform. What they didn't realize was that transitions create gaps, and gaps create truth. By policy, my system access wasn't revoked immediately. It was placed in temporary suspension, frozen pending transfer confirmation. That only happens during handover windows, when responsibility is still technically unresolved. No one mentioned it. They assumed the lock was final. It wasn't. I noticed it later that evening, sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing the termination packet with the same discipline I applied to everything else. A single line stood out, buried between standard clauses. Access remains limited, but intact until transfer completion. Limited. Yes. Gone. No, I didn't touch anything. I didn't log in. I didn't test boundaries. Dangerous calm isn't impulsive. It waits. That's when I remembered the maintenance chain. Every quarter, an automated sequence prepared the system for compliance validation. It wasn't flashy, but it was unforgiving. The sequence required a logical authorization token generated only by the original architect. Not management, not operations. Me. The timer was already running. I closed the document and shut my laptop. There was nothing to do yet. Silence can be an action when it's backed by structure. They believed the system would take care of itself. It would, just not the way they expected. I poured a glass of water and watched the city lights, counting hours instead of heartbeats. Calm, when sharpened by knowledge, becomes leverage, and leverage doesn't announce itself. It waits, patient and precise, until everyone else mistakes quiet for surrender, completely. The first warning arrived just after midnight. Quiet enough to be ignored by anyone who didn't know what it meant. I knew. I didn't need to be in the building to recognize the pattern. The system had entered its preparatory state, exactly on schedule, exactly as designed. Phones started ringing across operations. I wasn't there to hear them, but I could imagine the tone. Megan doesn't handle silence well. By 1 a.m., she was demanding escalation. "Get IT on this now," she snapped. According to a message forwarded to me later, this shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't have been happening to her. The problem was simple and brutal. No one left inside had sufficient authority to intervene. The maintenance sequence was locked behind compliance controls she had never bothered to understand. Tier 1 support saw the alerts and froze. Tier 2 checked permissions and backed away. Management asked for overrides that didn't exist. My name wasn't on the call list. I wasn't consulted. I wasn't even mentioned at first. That was the part I appreciated most. By 2 a.m., the warning had propagated. Dashboards shifted from green to amber. Megan demanded explanations. "Who designed this?" she asked. "Why can't we stop it?" Each question landed too late. Control isn't about panic response. It's about architecture. I sat at home, reading nothing, doing nothing, exercising the rare discipline of restraint. Cold control isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with threats or clever speeches. It lets systems behave exactly as specified. Then the log updated. Buried in the authentication chain, clear as daylight, sat a single identifier tied to final authorization. Jolie Hart. My name. Not as an error. Not as a fault. As the last verified architect of record. Inside the building, confusion hardened into fear, because evidence is far more frightening than rumors. Someone inside finally noticed. I know because Megan's tone changed. "Why is her name still there?" she demanded. "She's gone. Gone." Yes, erased. No, by dawn. The warning had matured into a locked state. The system wasn't broken. It was waiting, and so was I. Very patiently. Megan made her move just before sunrise. When exhaustion dulls caution and urgency feels like authority. I learned about it later. Through a forwarded alert stamped with her digital signature, she had approved a configuration change she didn't understand because she believed approval itself was power. This needs to be cleared now. She wrote, I'm signing off. There was no consultation, no review, no request for architectural context. She treated the system like paperwork, something you push through when it becomes inconvenient. In her mind, a signature fixed everything. It always had before. When someone else absorbed the consequences. Inside the building, tension spiked. Engineers hesitated. Reading the change request twice, someone asked, Is this safe? Megan responded the way she always did. It's already approved. Execute it. That sentence is how disasters begin. I recognized the change immediately. It touched a dependency chain she had never mapped. One I had warned about years earlier and documented in quiet. Ignored memos. The system accepted her authorization because policy allowed it during transition windows. Procedure had become a trap, and she had stepped into it confidently. I didn't intervene. Control doesn't mean interference. It means understanding when interference would expose you. Minutes later, the first secondary service dropped. Not loudly, just enough to be noticed. A ripple, not a crash. Megan demanded updates. Why is this taking so long, she asked. I already approved it. Then the ripple spread. What she didn't know was that her change forced incompatible services to reconcile states they were never designed to share. One failure cascaded into another, each perfectly logical, each perfectly documented. Alerts multiplied. Dashboards bloomed red. Phones lit up again. This wasn't supposed to happen, she said. According to a transcript I saw later, roll it back. They couldn't. Rollback required the same architectural authority she had just bypassed. If you believe Megan's just sign it and move on, approach was about to cost more than she imagined. Leave a 1 in the comments. I want to see where you stand. By the time she realized signing wasn't solving anything, the damage was already moving faster than her voice. She had pushed the wrong button, not because she was reckless, but because she believed systems obey confidence. They obey design. Design always answers back. 48 hours is a long time when no one knows who to blame, but everyone is certain it isn't them. By the second morning, Megan had found her answer. According to her, the failures traced back to legacy practices and the previous team. My name wasn't spoken at first, just implied, the way cowards prefer. Emails went out in waves. We're reviewing historical configurations. Megan wrote, Several decisions were made before my tenure. I read every word and said nothing. Silence. Again. Did the work for me. The more she talked, the thinner her explanations became. Inside the building, frustration turned into theater. Engineers defended themselves. Managers demanded timelines. Megan paced conference rooms, repeating the same line. This shouldn't have happened. Each time she said it, the room grew quieter. Systems don't fail out of spite. They fail for reasons, and reasons leave trails. By the end of the first day, Richard stopped repeating her language. He started asking questions instead. Who approved the change, he asked in one meeting. Megan answered quickly. Too quickly. It was already in motion. She said. That was true in the way half-truths always are. I stayed invisible. I didn't respond to messages routed through old channels. I didn't correct the record. Watching blame bounce around a room is almost comical when you know where it will land. Almost, on the second night. The tone shifted. The jokes stopped. An external compliance notice hit the executive inbox, short and formal, announcing a review tied to the ongoing outage. No accusations, no conclusions, just dates, scope, and mandatory cooperation. That email did what 48 hours of arguing could not. It froze the room. Megan stopped speaking altogether. Richard reread the notice twice, then asked for documentation no one could immediately produce. I closed my laptop and went to bed. Satisfied not by revenge, but by symmetry. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do, expose the truth slowly, painfully, and without asking permission, for once. Silence belonged to me, and it felt sharper than any argument they could still invent that night alone. I was asked to join the review on the third morning, not as an employee, but as an external witness. That distinction mattered. It meant I wasn't there to defend myself. only to explain how systems record truth when people don't. The room felt different this time. No raised voices, no confident monologues, just screens filled with timelines. Emails surfaced first. Megan's messages contradicted each other, minute by minute, subject lines changing as pressure rose. Then the logs appeared. Access attempts, approvals, timestamps, all aligned like a spine. The meeting calendar followed, showing a handover she claimed I skipped, scheduled, accepted, and then abandoned by only one attendee. I spoke calmly. I didn't accuse. I narrated. "This is the sequence," I said, pointing to the screen. "This is when the authorization was requested. This is when it was ignored. This is when the change was approved anyway. No adjectives, just order." Megan tried once. "That's not how I remember it," she said. The room didn't react. Memory had lost its vote. Evidence had replaced it. Richard leaned forward. Quiet now, flipping pages instead of cutting people off. He stopped at one document and frowned. It was an internal request form, signed weeks earlier, routed through legal and HR. My name sat on it under a single-line termination request. Requester Megan Crowell. No one spoke. The silence stretched, heavier than the outage itself. Richard looked up slowly. "You initiated this," he asked her. Megan didn't answer. She didn't need to. The paper already had. I realized then that justice doesn't arrive loudly. It accumulates. Email by email, log by log, until lies run out of space to stand. I hadn't come back to reclaim a job. I had come back because systems remember. And that morning, they remembered everything. I sat back in my chair, hands folded, feeling no triumph, only release. What collapsed in that room wasn't a person, but a narrative. For the first time since that meeting, the truth was louder than authority, and it was finally speaking for me. Quietly, methodically, without mercy. The record rewrote everything they thought they controlled and left no room left. She didn't collapse quietly. Megan fought like someone who knew the floor was giving way beneath her feet when the review resumed. Her voice was suddenly loud, then suddenly small. "You're misunderstanding me," she said. This was a team failure, when that didn't work. She cried, when tears failed. She blamed pressure, timelines, legacy systems, and finally me. I waited. She pointed across the table. "Jolie designed it. Jolie locked us out. She's doing this." The accusation sounded rehearsed, desperate, and hollow. I answered once, evenly. "Here is the final authorization log," I said, sliding the document forward. "And here is the change you approved without review." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Megan shook her head. "Hair loose now, composure gone." "That's not fair," she said. "I was told to move fast." Someone asked who told her. She had no name. Just air. Richard didn't interrupt this time. He watched her cycle through defenses like a checklist: deny, deflect, appeal, collapse. I added one more file to the table, the approval chain with timestamps, followed by the email where she overrode engineering objections with a single line. "Execute immediately." That was the end of motion. The board members leaned in. Questions turned short. Answers stopped coming. Megan's voice cracked. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, as if intent could undo architecture. I felt no anger, only distance. Systems don't respond to regret. The chair cleared his throat. "Effective immediately," he said. "Megan Crowell is suspended pending formal action." The words landed cleanly, without drama. She looked at me then, searching for mercy. I closed my folder. There was nothing left to add. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs the record to finish speaking. I stood, gathered my coat, and walked out while she stayed seated. The system hummed on. Indifferent. Outside the room, decisions were already being scheduled, notices drafted, access queued for removal. Her fight had ended. Mine never needed to begin, because the evidence had already done the work for me. That was the moment accountability finally replaced noise. By the time the clock crossed 120 hours, the outage had stopped being an emergency and become a reckoning. Systems were still locked, services degraded, contracts paused. The cost reports stopped using estimates and started using commas. No one announced totals out loud anymore. I watched from a distance. Cold satisfaction isn't celebration, it's alignment. Everything was unfolding exactly as designed, exactly as documented, exactly as warned. The system wasn't broken. It was obeying rules leadership never bothered to learn. Megan was gone before the fifth day ended. Security escorted her out. Access revoked. Credentials scrubbed. The internal memo was brief and merciless role terminated. Authority rescinded. Ongoing review. Her reputation followed the memo faster than she did. In this industry, word travels on the same rails as logs. Once it's written, it's forever. The damage kept tallying. Partners demanded explanations. Regulators requested timelines. Lawyers requested silence. The board requested accountability. All of them arrived late to a truth that had been waiting patiently. On the sixth morning, my phone rang. I hadn't heard that number since the termination meeting. Richard's voice was measured. "Careful, we need you back," he said. "Temporarily. To stabilize and certify." I didn't answer right away. Silence had served me well. I asked one question instead. "As what as an external consultant?" He replied, quickly, full authority. "Your terms." That was the moment satisfaction sharpened. Not because I'd won, but because the system had. They finally understood that control isn't charisma. It's design. It's restraint. It's listening before signing. I agreed to talk. I did not agree to return. When the call ended, the city looked unchanged, but I wasn't. 120 hours had erased a lie, rewritten a career, and proved something simple when you remove the people who know how things work. The truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And then it collects interest. I felt no urge to rush. Contracts would follow. Clauses would tighten. Numbers would settle. Calm held. Accountability finally had a spine. And silence, once weaponized against me, now protected my choices, my pace, and my leverage. I didn't return to the building as an employee. That chapter was closed, without bitterness. Instead, I met them across a table as an independent consultant, with my own terms, scope, and a fee that reflected what competence costs when it's missing. They agreed. Desperation makes negotiations efficient. I signed nothing I hadn't written myself. Authority was explicit. Accountability shared. Time respected. I wasn't there to rescue pride, only to stabilize what had been neglected and certify what should have been protected all along. Walking away afterward felt different from being fired. This time, it was deliberate, chosen, complete. The system was restored. Audits passed, and silence returned to places once loud with blame. I didn't break anything. I never needed to. I stepped aside and let structure and truth do their work. I didn't break the system. I only let it run exactly the way they treated the truth. I learned that truth doesn't always need a microphone, it needs structure, patience, and the courage to let consequences unfold naturally. That lesson has practical value. Document your work. Understand the systems you rely on, and never confuse confidence with competence. Emotionally, it taught me something harder, that being misjudged hurts most when you know you did everything right. And still no one asked. There's a human weight to that kind of injustice. It forces you to ask an uncomfortable ethical question. If you were pushed out by a lie, would you rush back in to save the people who wronged you? Or would you let the truth surface on its own? Even if it cost them dearly, would you choose mercy or accountability? And where do you draw that line without losing yourself? I don't think there's a single correct answer, but I do believe dignity matters. Acting correctly when you're unseen shapes who you become long after the crisis ends. That's the quiet power we rarely talk about. If you're listening right now, where are you tuning in from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd genuinely love to know who's here with me. And if this story made you pause, consider subscribing. One subscription helps this message reach someone who feels invisible at work. A like or a share might help someone rethink a reckless decision or find the strength to document the truth. By engaging, you're not just supporting a channel, you're helping these stories travel farther, reminding people that integrity still matters and that quiet courage can change more than we realize. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.